Alright, hello everybody. This is AW here with Hyperion and Chaya, and welcome to Theory Thursday. It's Thursday and we're reading some theory, so... Today we're reading somebody who's not a Marxist. We're reading not directly but indirectly, we're reading about Gilles Deleuze, one of my not favorite philosophers. Can't say much about Deleuze myself, except there's a certain somebody who waffles a bit and has a bit of an ego, who likes Gilles Deleuze a lot and thinks that, I somehow hate Gilles Deleuze. I don't hate Gilles Deleuze, but I certainly don't like him, and I don't really see...
Gilles Deleuze.
Yeah, that's
Gilles.
French.
Gilles Deleuze.
Gilles Deleuze.
So it's not like Gillette, it's not the shaving razor as well.
Gillette.
I kind of thought, it was better if it was like Gilles, because it's like, it's like Gillette, the razors, he's like shaving philosophy, down to something new. I thought the metaphor was fine, but okay, fine. Gilles Deleuze.
Yeah.
So anyways, this book is Thinking the Political, Deleuze and the Political. Well, what a interesting title by Paul Patton from Routledge, if you're interested to check it out. And we're just going to start reading this book. I have not read Deleuze. Well, I have read like 10 pages of Deleuze, and that's about it. I didn't find it impenetrable. I found it quite intelligible. It was the first part of the introduction of difference and repetition. And yeah, not bad. I thought it was actually interesting, but it didn't really keep my attention. It doesn't really make me want to keep reading it, though I will intend to finish that book, at least the necessary portions of that book, eventually, just to see what the hell the big deal is about this. But in here we're reading about Deleuze, and this is supposedly a book that one should be able to read without reading too much Deleuze or having known much about Deleuze. But so it should explain about what Deleuze and his politics and the ramifications of politics are. So learning experience for all of us, I think. Most of you probably who have heard of Deleuze, or haven't, most of you likely have not heard of Deleuze. And if you have, you probably don't know anything. Just like I don't. So anyways, let's get to it. The introduction. Gilles Deleuze. Wait, how was it?
Gilles.
Gilles.
Yeah, no, it's...
Gilles Deleuze does not conform to the standard image of a political philosopher. He has not written about Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, or Rousseau, and when he has written on philosophers who rate as political thinkers, such as Spinoza or Kant, he has not engaged with their political writings. He does not address issues such as the nature of justice, freedom, or democracy, much less the principles of procedural justification. His work shows an almost complete lack of engagement with the central problems and normative commitments of Anglo-American political thought. Only Anglo-American, apparently. The Germans, the Europeans, I would expect count there. Explicitly political concerns are not the largest part of his oeuvre, and they emerged relatively late in his career. He co-authored with Felix Guattari only two overtly political books, Anti-Oedipus, 1977, and 1,000 Plateaus, 1987. In addition, he published a chapter on the dialogues jointly composed with Claire Parnay, entitled Many Politics, Deleuze and Parnay, 1987. A book on Foucault, in 1988, an essay on Foucauldian memes, entitled Postscript on Control Societies, and several interviews which address political issues. Despite his lack of engagement with issues of normative political theory, Deleuze is a profoundly political philosopher. His collaborative work with Guattari offers new concepts and a new approach to thinking philosophically about the political.
Yep.
Michel Foucault, by the way, also known as Michael Foucault.
Yeah.
But we're trying to be a bit academic today, so the Anglo-American pronunciation of Michael Foucault will not be used. The profusion of idiosyncratic terminology makes it difficult for many to read his work as political philosophy. Deleuze and Guattari discuss society and politics in terms of machinic assemblages, becomings, nomadisms, forms of capture, and processes of deterritorialization and reterritorialization. Thus, A Thousand Plateaus opens with a blunt declaration that all we talk about are multiplicities, lines, strata, and segmentarities, lines of flight and intensities, machinic assemblages and their various types. The difficulty in reading their work is further compounded when many readers assume that Deleuze and Guattari employ much of this terminology as metaphor, while the authors insist that their use of language is not metaphoric, but conceptual. So, for example, in Anti-Oedipus, they follow Lewis Mumford in arguing that a society may be regarded as a machine in the strict sense without metaphor. In support of their claim that, I don't know who Lewis Mumford is.
Me either.
So, in support of their claim that Mumford described certain ancient forms of empire as mega machines in a literal rather than metaphoric sense of the term, they point out that he justified this term by reference to Deleuze. I don't know how to pronounce that, some French name.
Rollo. That's my
Rollo.
best guess.
Rollo.
Rollo's classic definition of a machine as a combination of resistant parts, each specialized in function, operating under human control to transmit motion and perform work. Deleuze and Guattari's machinic concept of society is discussed in Chapter 5, while their concept of concepts is discussed in Chapter 1 and compared with Derrida's, specifically philosophical and deconstructive concepts. So, a guiding principle in this study is that Deleuze's contribution to political thought must be assessed in relation to his own conception and practice of philosophy. We start from the premise that Deleuze must be taken at his word when he describes his work with Guattari as philosophy, nothing but philosophy, in the traditional sense of the word. Accordingly, our approach is framed by the conception of philosophy as the creation of concepts which is set out in What is Philosophy? Essay by Deleuze and Guattari in 1994. Chapter 1 points to connections between this distinctive conception of philosophy and Deleuze's discussions of the nature of thought in his earlier work. The aim is to show that both the distinctive practice of philosophy in Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus, and the concept of philosophy outlined in What is Philosophy, are consistent developments from Deleuze's earlier treatments of the nature and task of philosophy. The chapters that follow seek to draw out the conceptual structure that underlies Deleuze and Guattari's nomadic style of thought and writing, and to elucidate some of the key concepts specific to their social and political philosophy. As the discussion of concepts of power and freedom in chapters 3 and 4 shows, it is possible to translate some of Deleuze and Guattari's terminology into the language of Anglophone political theory. However, there is always a remainder that does not translate in a series of points at which the normative dimension of their works do not correspond to those of Anglo-American political theory. For example, their conception of power is closer to the idea of capacity to act than to the normative notion of action with adversary effects. Let me just reread that. For example, their conception of power is closer to the idea of capacity to act than to a normative notion of action which adversely affects the capacity of others to act. And that's actually sensible. That's exactly what I think power means when you use the word power. Why one would define it otherwise seems weird to me. Their conception of freedom is closer to Nietzsche's ideal of self-overcoming than it is to ideas of negative or positive freedom. Alright, so sounds good to me. This points to a further difficulty in reading their work as political philosophy, namely that they propose concepts that do not readily map onto even the most enduring fictions of Western political thought. In their social theory, as well as in their account of individual subjectivity, Deleuze and Guattari's privilege the processes of creative transformation and the lines of flight along which individuals or groups are transformed into something different to what they were before. I have no idea what lines of flight are, so here I'm just understanding it metaphorically. Hopefully this will be explained later down. They do not refer to individual subjects of freedom or autonomy, much less to notions of contract or consent. The work is couched entirely in non-subjectivist terms and refers only to abstract lines, movements, and processes of various kinds. They appear to be more interested in ways in which society is differentiated or divided than in ways in which it is held together. Well, obviously, it's a philosopher of difference. They are concerned neither with the legitimation of government, nor its delegitimation, but rather with the processes through which existing forms of government of self and others are transformed. Although not a political philosopher in the sense that he belongs to this disciplinary genre, Deleuze has long held the view that philosophy is a political activity. This becomes explicit in the final product of his partnership with Guattari, What is Philosophy?, where the authors endow philosophy with a political vocation. They define philosophy as the creation of untimely concepts, in Nietzsche's sense of this term, namely acting counter to our time, and thereby acting on our time, and let us hope for the benefit of a time to come. So that's piggybacking off Nietzsche's their work on Nietzsche, 1983, Essay 2 on the uses and disadvantages of history for life forward, in case you care to find where that is from. They argue that philosophy should be utopian in the sense of contributing to the emergence of new forms of individual and collective identity, or as they put it, summoning forth a new earth in the people that does not yet exist. Their use of the term utopia must be treated with caution, since they reject authoritarian or transcendent utopias in favor of those that are imminent, revolutionary, and libertarian. It is with this relation to utopia they argue that philosophy becomes political and takes the criticism of its own time to its highest point. So, all right, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of utopianism. That's just me.
I liked the turn of phrase "a new earth" and a people that does not yet exist.
Yeah, so far, I
maybe it's
mean,
too idealistic, but
I mean,
I really
definitely
like
utopian,
that-
but
yeah,
in a way, it's also Hegelian, which
yeah,
one can see Hegelian philosophy, Marxist philosophy, to definitely be about a world to come that is, it's meant to be. And Marx in the 1844 manuscripts is all about that. He's enunciating the possibility of a world to come, which he thinks must come, but which, up to now has not yet come. And part of the problem of communists is going, well, it's not coming. Where is it? How are we? What are we supposed to be doing? Did we do something wrong? And I think part of, while I am anti-utopian in an essential sense, I'm not anti-utopian in the sense in that I think we must provide some vision of the future, of a world to come that we want to come.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a big failing point for Marxists. In which we get this negative view of communism. Communism is just a negative of capitalism. But I think, people require much more. They require a positive vision rather than just simply a negative vision. Because, Marx seems to take it that he's providing some sort of determinate negation. So it's a negative vision, but it's also a negative vision in the positive sense. But at the same time, it's a rather empty vision, in my opinion. So, this seems interesting to me in that there are some people on the left who are Marxists who think that Deleuzianism is not actually ultimately revolutionary, it's actually reactionary. There's reasons in which I think that there seems to be fundamental reasons that one could think that, just because there seems to be an aestheticism that runs in Deleuze. But I'm not sure about that, since obviously I haven't read Deleuze much to be able to say it. So, I'm not going to lay judgment on that.
Yeah, this definitely seems to counteract that claim, but I don't know.
So we would only know that if we've actually read Deleuze, and since we haven't been reading Deleuze, and this is only interpretation of Deleuze, I'll take it with a grain of salt either way, but we'll see. We'll see what they can make it work out. Continuing, the desire for a philosophy that would be both critical and creative may be found throughout Deleuze's work. His first book was a study of Hume's conception of human nature, first published in 1953. In answer to a question from Antonio Negri about the relation of his earlier work to the political, Deleuze replies that what interested him in Hume was not the forms of representation of political life, but the forms of collective creation. Quote, In Hume I found a very creative conception of the institution and right. End quote. He comments further in response to Negri that a constant theme of his work has been the conditions under which new institutions can arise. In this regard, it is not the law which is interesting, but jurisprudence insofar as it is truly creative of rights. For this reason, he suggests that this should not be left to judges, but should also involve those most directly affected in the elaboration of new principles of right. Chapter 6 takes up the question of jurisprudence with reference to the elaboration of common law, Aboriginal land rights. Chapter 6 takes up the question of jurisprudence with reference to the elaboration of common law, Aboriginal land rights in Australia and Canada. And so a concrete case study, or concrete application.
Yeah.
If ever all goes well, I hope we actually end up reading this entire book. It seems, I'd definitely want to know all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Aspects of Deleuze's earlier work have exercised considerable influence on political thought in France. For example, his efforts during the late 1950s and early 1960s to reformulate and revalue the concept of difference were an important contribution to the subsequent development of unorthodox philosophies of difference by a number of French philosophers. His account of Nietzsche as a systematic thinker who privileged difference over identity is credited with having launched the enthusiasm for Nietzsche among left-wing French thinkers during the late 1960s, 1970s. Chapter 2 looks at the concept of multiplicity that is specific to Deleuze's Metaphysics of Difference, and at the manner in which this concept informed his work with Guattari. This chapter also discusses the anti-Platonism and the resistance to Hegel which are manifest in Deleuze's critique of the philosophy of representation. Alright, that will probably be a chapter of much interest to Hyperion and I.
Yep.
The final section of this chapter takes up the relationship of Deleuze's concept of difference to what has become known as the politics of difference. Chapter 3 examines this reconstruction of the Nietzschean concept of will to power and shows how this was an important methodological resource for Foucault's critical historical analysis during the 1970s. After outlining this reconstruction of Nietzsche's concept in terms of active and reactive force, affirmative and negative expressions of will to power, we argue that this provides the prototype for the evaluative structures of concepts developed in Anti-Oedipus and 1000 Plateaus. Deleuze belonged to a generation of French intellectuals whose political consciousness was formed, as Guattari once said, in the enthusiasm and naivete of deliberation. Whereas Guattari had a long career of activism in radical psychotherapy and left-wing organizations, Deleuze first came into contact with political movements and activists after 1968. From this period onwards, he became involved with a variety of groups and causes, including how do you say that?
Groupe d'information sur les prisons.
Prison.
Alright.
I was just messing. What is it? Begun by Foucault? Oh, I don't know. I've never heard of it.
Groupe d'information sur les prisons. That's my best guess. Sorry.
Well, what is it? Do you know what it is?
It says group of information on the prisons.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Alright. Begun by Foucault and others in 1972. Protests against the treatment of immigrant workers and support for homosexual rights. Later, he took public positions on issues such as the deportation by French authorities of a lawyer for the Baader-Meinhof group, Klaus Croissant, and the imprisonment of Antonio Negri and other Italian intellectuals on charges of complicity with terrorism. He also wrote several pieces in support of the Palestinian people, declared his opposition to the French nuclear strike force, and signed letters critical of French involvement in the Gulf War.
That's good. I didn't know he was so political, to be honest.
Doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, everybody was political at this time. It was pretty hard not to be.
Well, you should be political if you're involved in intellectual life, unless your politics suck.
Yeah. This public intellectual activity did not distinguish Deleuze from a variety of other neo-Marxist, existentialist, anarchist, or left-wing liberal intellectuals who signed the same petitions and took part in the same demonstrations. By contrast, his conception of the political role of intellectuals and the relationship between his own political activity and his philosophy set him apart from many of his contemporaries. In a 1972 interview with Deleuze, Foucault tells the story of a Maoist who once said to him, quote, "I can easily understand Sartre's purpose in siding with us. I can understand his goals and his involvement in politics. I can partially understand your position, since you've always been concerned with the problem of confinement. But Deleuze is an enigma." End quote. Reminds me of Kawame. Kawame loves to say this about Deleuze. He's like, Deleuze is an enigma. I suppose, let me just say, I don't think one can fundamentally be an enigma unless one is literally insane. And I don't think Deleuze is insane. He seems a bit too rational for that. So, though one may think he's an enigma, I think it's all about finding what the logic was. Everybody has a logic, unless they're crazy. And even crazy people have logics. I mean, there's ways to understand them, why they do things, how they do things. One literally has to lose their mind in a complete and utter sense of just just doing things for utterly no discernible reason whatsoever. But we'll see. In reply, Deleuze points to the emergence of a new conception of the relationships between theory and practice in his own work with Guattari, as well as in Foucault's writings, a conception that understands these relationships in a partial and fragmentary manner, not as determinate relationships between the theory understood as a totality and practice understood as an equally unified process of the application or implementation of theory, but as a system of relays within, but as, quote, a system of relays within a multiplicity of parts that are both theoretical and practical, end quote. The conception of theory as a relay of practice stands in marked contrast to the idea of the intellectual that the intellectual represents the vanguard of a proletarian movement which embodies the forces of social change. So, no idea what the relay means here. I kind of get some metaphoric sense of it, but obviously I don't know what the technical sense is yet. It is closer to the ideal expressed by Nietzsche in Schopenhauer as Educator, when he draws a distinction between academic philosophers in the service of the state and true philosophers who must remain private thinkers. Sartre, whom Deleuze admires during his youth and regards as an important influence, was a modern paradigm of the private thinker who spoke and acted on his own behalf, rather than as the representative of a political party or social class. Such thinkers, Deleuze wrote, seek to align themselves with the unrepresentable forces that introduce disorder and a dose of permanent revolution into political and social life. So Deleuze, a crypto-Trotskyist? We will see. Private is perhaps not the best term to describe such thinkers, since it suggests isolation from social forces and social movements, when, for Deleuze, these are essential conditions of the activity of thinking. Foucault's Discipline and Punish provides an example of this private use of reason, to the extent that this book might be regarded as a theoretical relay of the political activity undertaken by the GIP. Similarly, Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus might be understood as a theoretical relay of practical resistance to the role of psychoanalysis in the repression of potentially revolutionary expressions of desire. The aim of their schizoanalysis is practical rather than theoretical. The analysis of the forms of unconscious desire and their political investments is conceived as a means to the liberation or unblocking of the creative or schizo process present in a given social field. At the same time, with regard to the other side of the relation between theory and practice described above, Deleuze does not hesitate to describe Anti-Oedipus as, quote, from beginning to end a book of political philosophy, end quote. This book exemplifies his view, which we discuss in Chapter 1, that philosophy is and should be a response to problems that are posed outside of the academy. Okay, what page are we on?
5. Or 14 in the PDF. I guess. It says 5 at the bottom of the page, 14 out of 176.
Yeah.
Okay, found the spot. Sorry, screwed up.
Or 15, sorry.
Yeah. This book exemplifies his view, which we discuss in Chapter 1, that philosophy is and should be a response to problems that are posed outside the academy. For Deleuze, such problems are a crucial enabling condition of creativity in thought. The idea that philosophy creates concepts that are inseparable from a form of life and mode of activity points to a constant dimension of Deleuze's conception of thought and philosophy. It implies that the test of these concepts is ultimately pragmatic. In the end, their value is determined by the use to which they can be put, outside as well as within philosophy. So any thoughts on that?
I don't know.
I mean, it's definitely reminds me of like what Edgar Waffle says a lot. You know, it's about being creative. You know, philosophy is about creative stuff. I don't think so, by the way. I think that's horseshit. If you're not after truth, I don't know what the hell you're after. If you may be inquiring about something that exists, and you may be inquiring to the truth of what it is, and that may be something that nobody else inquired before. Therefore, you're creating new concepts, quote unquote. But I don't think one is just like sitting around twiddling their thumbs and creating new concepts. You know, it seems to me that's a bit of a kind of a nonsense thing that Deleuze is saying here, in that he's saying, oh, well, you know, we're creating new concepts, but he's admitting that he's taking the concepts from something that already exists. You know, something that's outside of academia. It's not yet considered of any importance to thought in academia. So, I mean, I actually can agree with that. You know, I can agree that that's possible, and maybe one should be doing it, maybe not. There's plenty of things which I can see that's outside of academia which I see no utter worth whatsoever in. But hey, if you want to think about that and conceptualize it, be my guest. And I think that second to last line about the idea that philosophy creates concepts that are inseparable from a form of life and mode of activity points to a constant dimension of Deleuze's conception of thought and philosophy. That's a very Hegelian thing. Hegel's whole thing is concepts or ways of being and doing. You know, so you don't have concepts that aren't already, you know, things that you have in the world already existing, being done, being acted upon. Whether it is a concept of a way of cognition or whether it's a concept of a thing itself, nonetheless, you know, it's a real thing. It's an objective thing. So just an interesting parallel, which may cash out, may not cash out. Continuing, Anti-Oedipus brought notoriety to the authors as founders of the current of post-1968 leftist thought known as the philosophy of desire. It was widely read in the belief that such periods of revolutionary ferment saw the emergence of an unadulterated desire and a will to change which was as quickly suppressed by the established organization of political opposition, such as the Communist Party and trade unions, as it was by the forces of order. Deleuze and Guattari shared many of the political and theoretical orientations common to the post-1968 libertarian left. These included a concern for the political effectivity of desire and the unconscious investments which play a part in the macro-political movement, a concern for the micropolitics of social life, and a concern for the politics of language and signification. While they were neither semioticians nor theorists of discourse in Foucault's sense of the term, they did acknowledge the importance of language and its pragmatic dimension for modern political life. Finally, while they were not Marxists in any traditional doctrinal sense, an anti-capitalist thematic pervades all their writings up to and including what is philosophy. In the interview with Negri cited earlier, Deleuze reaffirms his sympathy with Marx and describes capitalism as a fantastic system for the fabrication of great wealth and great suffering. He asserts that any philosophy worthy of being called political must take account of the nature and evolution of capitalism. In return, Negri finds in A Thousand Plateaus the, quote, the fundamental elements of the renewal of historical materialism in function of the new dimensions of capitalistic developments, end quote. An interesting claim, but a claim that, considering the few people I know that are interested and like Negri, doesn't seem to quite play out. Or at least I have seen no hints of any such thing as far as I know.
Wait, what? You mean...
So,
that's what Negri said about A Thousand Plateaus by Deleuze.
Yeah. And supposedly Swedenista says that, he does see things about from A Thousand Plateaus, kind of in Negri's empire. But I wouldn't have an idea because I haven't read it, and let me tell you, I am not about to read it.
It's what I've been told by the people I know who have read Empire. It basically is just pure word salad. It's just like A Thousand Plateaus in that regard, if you're talking about structure and style and stuff. But content-wise, I don't really know.
I don't remember. I read it.
There's something there. Swedenista likes it. He thinks it's true. He thinks definitely empire. We are in the age of empire. Of whatever that means, it's just capital is empire. There's no nation states or whatever, so they are no longer historically of any consideration, or therefore of no theoretical importance to future theories of practice and whatnot. But that's just typical autonomism speaking right there. So, continuing, despite their adoption of aspects of Marxist social and economic theory, there are significant points at which Deleuze and Guattari abandon traditional Marxist views. They reject the Marxist philosophy of history in favor of a differential typology of the macro and micro assemblages, which determine the character of social life. I have no idea what the heck these are. I mean, these are all the words I recognize and I understand them in normal ways, but I'm wary of interpreting it in this way. So, continuing, they reject the idea that contradiction is the motor of historical progress and argue that a society is defined less by its contradictions than by its lines of flight or deterritorialization. Whatever the fuck that means. I don't know what lines of flight means.
I know he uses it to define rhizomes. Or, it has something to do with rhizomes, but I don't know what.
Yeah, I have no idea. Hopefully, this is all explained later in the book. I know Kawame showed me a diagram of 1,000 plateaus, the conceptual structures.
Yeah, I've seen that.
It wasn't nonsensical. It was just it seemed
complicated to me.
It wasn't even complicated so much as I see where it's going. I saw the connections. I'm okay, but I don't know what the terms mean, and the image gives you an idea what the terms mean. But at the same time, it's just why is this deep? In my opinion,
is it the one that looks like geometric shapes?
Yeah, the cones and the fish and the atoms, the cells, the fish.
Yeah.
And then it goes all the way up to the skies, and I get it. I know what the general structure kind of is, but I don't know what the specific stuff is. But yeah, let's not be too hasty, and like it is an introduction, and it's just like it's typical introductions that they'll use their own terms that are like haha, and then they'll explain it later on. So we'll see what it all means. So continuing, they reject any internal or evolutionist account of the origins of the state in favor of a neo-Nietzschean view according to which the form of the state has always existed, even if only as a virtual tendency resisted by other processes within a given social field. Okay. Actual states are as often as not imposed from without. What? Does that sentence make sense to you?
Are
Like-
as often as
like-
not.
The state is some kind of like alien that just shows up out of nowhere and imposes itself.
No, it's saying
Okay.
that states, like every empire crumbles from within.
Yes,
Well, just
yes.
as often it is imposed from without, is what it's saying.
I see.
Actual states are as often as not, as often as not imposed from without.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure is what he's saying.
Yeah, that's kind of what I
I'm
was
still
interpreting,
stuck on
but
the
it just
last
seems weird.
sentence. I mean, I'm sure it has something to do with the lines of flight thing, so I won't give it too much thought yet, but I'll keep it in mind. The virtual tendency. I don't know what he means by that. I remember something from, what's it called, Difference and Repetition, about like ascending to the virtual or something.
Yeah, there's something about
But
that.
I don't know what he
let's
means.
let's not like really like focus on like
All right.
on speculating on what it means. If this book is any good, it better like define shit eventually. It's supposed to be introducing people who haven't read Deleuze. At least that's what the blurb on Amazon told me. If they lied to me, well, fuck whoever wrote that blurb. But we'll work it out. We'll see. There is like a book that I have the same title. It's a dictionary on Deleuze. So at worst we can check that out if we must. So continuing, they reject economic determinism in favor of a quote machinic determinism, according to which collective assemblages of enunciation determine the social usage of language and even the tools employed in a given society, presuppose a social machine that selects them and takes them into its phylum. It definitely words sour to me.
Does it mean phylum in the biological sense?
Probably it's just kind of a structural thing.
Taxonomic rank or whatever. Yeah. I mean, Hegel uses order and genus, right? So he can use phylum if you want.
Alright, can you continue this? Like my voice is getting a bit
Okay, yeah.
blurry.
In Anti-Oedipus, 1977, and 1,000 Plateaus, 1987, Deleuze and Guattari developed their own account of capitalism as a unique mode of economic and political coordination and regulation, which is imminent to the social field. In contrast to earlier forms of empire, which operated by the transcendent quote-unquote overcoding or capture of existing social and economic processes. Whereas earlier forms of empire extracted rent or other forms of obligatory payment, Deleuze and Guattari argue that capital functions in the manner of an quote-unquote axiomatic system, which is indifferent to the context of the propositions it connects. It produces a surplus by means of the axiomatic conjugation of decoded flows of labor, money, commodities, and increasingly information. Deleuze comments in the interview with Negri that what they found most useful in Marx was, quote, his analysis of capitalism as an imminent system that's constantly overcoming its own limitations, and then coming up against them once more in broader form because its fundamental limit is capital itself, end quote. The lesson he and Guattari draw from this is that, at the macro-social level of economic and political institutions, there is a permanent possibility of piecemeal social change. While the capitalist economy might constitute an axiomatic system inseparable from the fabric of modern social life, this does not mean that particular axioms cannot be removed or replaced by others. I know what it means, but I think we would do well to put it in common language, right?
Yeah. Or what exactly are you talking about?
Oh, definitely the last sentence where he says, the economy is inseparable from, how we live our lives, So, that's what a lot of people I know complain about. Like, what if we get rid of capitalism, our lives will be totally radically changed, and they don't have to be, I don't think, but it could be the case. Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, that's basically what he's saying. So axioms can be
removed or replaced by other type things.
Well, the capitalist economy may constitute an axiomatic system inseparable from the fabric of modern social life. This does not mean that particular axioms cannot be removed or replaced by others. So yeah, say Deleuze is here denying that if you remove capitalism, suddenly the state changes character or something, or the ethics changes character or whatever. And I can't agree. I mean, there are ways, given how big the economy is, most of our lives is economic, is shaped by economics. You can't tell me that if you remove the economy and changes something new, it's not going to have massive cascade effect in everything else. It's just here Marx just gets one over on Deleuze. I don't know what Deleuze has to justify what he says, but it's not true. I mean, it's very clear in the way that capitalism itself functions to make sure that it infects everything else.
Yeah.
It generates its own, value systems. It goes and overtakes the state, overtakes the educational system, it overtakes the ethics, overtakes everything. If you change that, will you have just as equally a radical change? Probably not, because of the way the system works, but at the same time, something else can take a new form of, what he calls, what one may call the dominant axiom. But nonetheless, it would have cascading effects.
Yeah, it does infect our ethics and things because it appeals to people's ethics and tries to change them occasionally. Yeah. I don't know. I would have to have an example of exactly what he's talking about to see whether or not I agree with the instances of what he means. All right. You want me to go on?
Yeah, go ahead.
In common with Foucault and other post-structuralist political thinkers, Deleuze and Guattari do not envisage global revolutionary change, but rather a process of active, quote-unquote, active experimentation, unquote, which is played out in between economic and political institutions and the sub-institutional movements of desire and affect. Hence their sympathy for minority groups, where quote-unquote minority should be understood in a qualitative rather than a quantitative sense. The minor is that which deviates from the majority or standard, which is the bearer of the dominant social code. The importance of minority does not reside in the fact of its relative exclusion from the majority, but in the political potential of its divergence from the norm. Minority provides an element capable of deterritorializing the dominant social codes. Conversely, it is the process of deterritorialization which constitutes the essence of revolutionary politics for Deleuze and Guattari.
Holy shit.
All right.
Okay, so this is a major confirmation of something I had heard and I had no idea about. People had indeed blamed Deleuze for like Idpol.
I was
Yeah.
just about to say
Yeah.
that this shit sounds like Idpol. Yeah.
All right. Not the incorporation of minority demands by adjustment to the axioms of the social machine, nor the reconstitution of a code, but the process of becoming minor, of widening the gap between oneself and the norm. Yeah, definitely. What is important in their view is a, quote, revolutionary becoming, unquote, end quote, which is in principle open to anyone. That is from Deleuze and Parnay, 1987. What they mean by this is not simply resistance to the mechanisms of capture and reterritorialization, but the invention of new forms of subjectivity and new forms of connection between deterritorialized elements of the social field. Deleuze and Guattari provide a conceptual language in which to describe the impact of social movements that impose new political demands upon the qualitative or cultural dimensions of social life. More generally, they contrast the dynamism of such forms of social nomadism with the essentially parasitic and reactive character of forms of capture. They point to examples from logic and computational theory, as well as the natural world, to show that centralized control mechanisms are not essential to the functioning of complex systems. Deleuze and Guattari, 1987, 15-18. It is not the control of state power which interests them, but rather the forms of social change which take place alongside or beneath any given form of state, and the manner in which these changes impact upon political institutions themselves. Huh.
So basically, it's their focus is on the quote-unquote societal deviance as, if not a revolutionary subject, which, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
they're not Marxists, but like that general idea, I guess.
That they want to promote deviancy?
Yeah, like
That's what I was thinking.
yeah, like the people who I mean, oh, never mind. Sorry there.
What?
I just lost my thought there. I was probably gonna ramble anyway, but
You know what this sounds like? We need to correct the record, people. Everything they blame cultural Marxists for, they're wrong. It's cultural delusionism.
Deleuze and Guattari.
Seriously,
Yeah,
I've never-
literally.
I haven't read anything in the Frankfurter Schule, the Frankfurt School, that promotes any sort of like deviancy. Maybe like outsider type stuff, maybe, but nothing like the common person would be like, "Whoa, that's weird." Really, you know?
mhm.
I don't know. Maybe it's just in something I haven't read from Adorno or something, but yeah.
Oh,
I'm gonna
no.
write some copy pasta. Like I'm gonna post it
Yeah.
everywhere. Excuse me. It's gonna be like a version of that Linux one. What you call Linux is actually whatever that thing plus Linux. But it's gonna be what you call cultural Marxism is actually delusionism plus Guattarism or something.
Guattarianism.
Guattarianism.
I'll get to work on that after this.
All right. The Deleuzeers are responsible for Idpol. All right. The anti-statist and minoritarian tenor of Deleuze and Guattari's politics leads some commentators to represent them as a new species of anarchist. I can see it, like it's social anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Yet while they share the anarchist suspicion of political representation, they are no less suspicious of attempts to turn the principles of non-coercive and non-hierarchical organization into a blueprint for society as a whole. Todd May has suggested that the political perspective which they share with some other post-structuralists, such as Foucault and Lyotard. Is it Lyotard or Lyotard?
Lyotard.
Lyotard.
Yeah.
May be considered an offshoot of the anarchist tradition. He argues that this new anarchism, quote, retains the ideas of intersecting and irreducible local struggles, of a wariness, about representation, of the political as investing the entire field of social relationships, and of the social as a network, rather than a closed holism, a concentric field, or a hierarchy. End quote. May 1994. Or May, Todd May, 1994. However, May also notes that, in common with other post-structural thinkers, Deleuze and Guattari abandoned several key assumptions of classical anarchist thought, such as the repressive conception of power, and a belief in the essentially benign and cooperative character of human nature. As he points out, their version of post-structuralist politics remains a tactical rather than a strategic style of political thought, directed at particular or local forms of revolutionary becoming rather than wholesale social change. So they want gradual change. I mean, that's how it happens anyway. I mean, think about the 50s. Elvis shaking his hips was provocative, and now it's seen as nothing. Yeah. Such a political philosophy offers no guarantees. It is not a narrative of inevitable progress, nor does it offer the security of commitment to a single set of values against which progress may be judged. Does this entail a pessimism or nihilism about the human condition, a certain tragic note, as Negri suggests in his Deleuze book, 1995? Deleuze replies that it does not, and that, on the contrary, the fact that movements can always become bogged down in history or that revolutionary processes can turn out badly implies the need for a permanent quote-unquote concern or vigilance with regard to the fate of the lines of flight along which movement is possible. All right, any thoughts?
No, not really.
I have none.
All right. In the interview with Foucault referred to above, Deleuze describes the political function of intellectual work in terms of relays between the theoretical and practical components of a, quote, multiplicity of parts. Okay, yeah, he's using relay in the common sense term. You know, when we do something theoretical, people were like, well, where's the practicality in it? Well, there's supposed to be a relay between two. You know, you put the theory into practice. This is an allusion to the concept of machinic assemblage, which he and Guattari first employed in their theory of desire in Anti-Oedipus, but subsequently broadened to include social, linguistic, and conceptual, as well as quote-unquote practical assemblages. Their theory of assemblages provides the conceptual framework for 1,000 Plateaus, which, like Anti-Oedipus, is entirely a work of political philosophy. Chapters 4, 5, and 6, I assume of this book, discuss several of the key concepts of the political philosophy presented in this mature work, including, quote, becoming, end quote, well, becoming, minority, nomadism, war machine, capture, and deterritorialization. A central claim of the present study is that it is the concept of, quote, deterritorialization, which bears the weight of the utopian vocation which Deleuze and Guattari attribute to philosophy. This concept is one that they invent in Anti-Oedipus, then refine and extend in 1,000 Plateaus, before applying it to the nature of thought in What is Philosophy? The concept of deterritorialization implies a contrast between earth and territory. Terre, territoire, right?
Yes.
Yeah, earth and territory, understood as the two fundamental dimensions of nature. Territory is in the first instance territorialized earth, but it produces its own movements of deterritorialization, while conversely the earth gives rise to processes of re-territorialization and the constitution of new territories. Stable identities or territories are therefore secondary formations upon the mobile earth. Deleuze and Guattari describe a world in which the overriding tendency is deterritorialization. Okay, so first the Earth was the Earth, then established territories, and now their goal is to remove these territories so that everyone enjoys the Earth and so on? Or what?
Your guess is as good as mine.
Okay,
honestly.
that's what all I'm getting it from it, yeah.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
And rather, like, nation-states want a re-territorialization, like they want more land and so on.
Uh-huh.
Okay, well, it seems like an interesting concept. I mean, it makes sense to me. I always think, like, why did territories establish? Because one group didn't like another or something. Or just people on the Earth doing things. A Thousand Plateaus is not political philosophy in the sense that it provides tools for the justification or critique of political institutions and processes. Rather, it is a political ontology that provides tools to describe transformative, creative, or deterritorializing forces and movements. At one point, the author suggests that politics alone provides the horizon towards which all their efforts are directed. Quote, before being, there is politics. End quote. Deleuze and Guattari, 1987. This ontology is an ethics in the sense that, as for Spinoza, normative commitments are imminent to their philosophy of nature as well as to their social ontology. In all cases, it presents a world understood as a complex of interconnected assemblages, earth, territory, forms of deterritorialization and reterritorialization, where the overriding norm is that of deterritorialization. So it just happens that, there's the earth, there are territories, deterritorialization occurs, reterritorialization occurs, but the norm is deterritorialization, I guess. That's what they're saying. Like the
I have no idea.
that, we lose land through war, we gain more land through war, but ultimately we're getting rid of
I have no
the
idea.
territories.
I think I've been understanding this as they want the tendency to be towards deterritorialization, not that it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I just don't understand what they mean by overriding norm. I guess they mean that's what they want. It is because they conceive of philosophy as an inherently political activity that what is philosophy does not have a separate section devoted to the political. When they describe philosophy as utopian in the sense that it summons forth new earths and new peoples, Deleuze and Guattari align it with the creative aspect of this complex process of reterritorialization and deterritorialization. By their account, philosophy is utopian in the sense that it opens up the possibility of new forms of individual and collective identity, thereby effecting the absolute deterritorialization of the present in thought. So by territory, they mean all kinds of territory, not just the Earth. Because they're opening up new forms of the individual and collective identity. We're getting rid of the old, we're deterritorializing things. So, whereas gender just belonged to the binary, now if we dare deterritorialize it, there is a multiplicity of genders and so on and so forth. I don't know.
It seems like it, yeah. That would be it seems in line to me. At least with what we have so far.
Yeah, and the only thing that I can think about that, like because as someone pointed out to me the other day, Deleuze wanted for us to not conform to one gender or the other even, but to be one or the other, flip through them like we're, just doing different things.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really care. I just want people to be themselves and
I
not
agree.
care what others think, But, I mean, I don't have a huge problem with any of this. Deterritorialization. Sure, I want to get rid of things that are preventing human development. Because I would like a new man or a new, by man I mean human, new, what do you say, new peoples, new earths? Yeah. What that entails is contingent, but sounds like a good idea at least. Okay, moving on. The theory of assemblages, developed in 1,000 Plateaus, incorporates elements of the concept of multiplicity, which was a constant concern of Deleuze's earlier studies in the history of philosophy. Chapter 2 argues that this concept of multiplicity provides the basis for his distinctive contribution to the philosophy of difference, namely a concept of individuality which does not conform to the logic of identity. Yeah, this is where it gets into that. One of the ways in which Deleuze often sought to present the case for his philosophy of multiplicity was to argue for the priority of the conjunction and over the verb to be. By this means, he sought to carry out a partial overturning of the philosophical tradition and to free the connective power of relationality from its subordination to attribution. Thinking with and instead of thinking is instead of thinking for is. Wait, hold on, I'm confused now. I get it, the way it's written is difficult. Thinking with and instead of thinking is, instead of thinking for is. Empiricism has never had another secret. End quote. Deleuze and Parnay, 1987. If I'm understanding this correctly, he doesn't, he understands that we are different beings at certain points in our lives, and he doesn't like an absolute definitive thing, this is, but this is with something right now, and it may not later. I don't, does that make sense? Like the and over to be would be like, okay, it made sense when I was reading it the first time. Now I could think I confused myself.
Oh, it's unity. Okay. Identity is from unity. Is from and. That's what I remember from the general stuff I've read about him. Difference is primary, and therefore the and comes first. This unity comes before unity.
Okay. As the indeterminate conjunction which subtends all relations, quote, and, end quote, comes to stand for that which is in between any two things brought into relation with each other. Okay, yeah, it's as I was thinking about it, but I put it into those words right now. It becomes an axiom of Deleuze and Guattari's political philosophy that new quote-unquote becomings, events or beings, always emerge from this quote-unquote in-between. In their view, quote-unquote and is always a border between two elements, and, as such, a potential line of flight along which things happen and changes take place. In perspective, it is entirely appropriate that this book should be called Deleuze and the Political. It does not aim to present a definitive characterization of Deleuze's political philosophy, supposing that such a thing were possible, nor does it seek to recount and detail Deleuze's political activities, although I have made some reference to these in order to help situate his practice of conceptual creation. Rather, the aim of this book is to present some of the ways in which Deleuze's philosophy has already shown itself to be to be productive for political thought, and to suggest other ways in which it might become so. Deleuze and the political can only refer to an open-ended series of relations between philosophy and politics, a series of encounters between philosophical concepts and political events. Alright, that's the end of the introduction. So does it still sound appealing to you guys? No?
I don't know.
I still want to know what it's about. At least read like the
Yeah.
first chapter.
Yeah.
But it took us an hour, so I think that's good enough. We'll continue this some other time.
Yeah.
Alright, well,
Alright.
that was Deleuze.
That is Deleuze plus Guattari bringing you cultural delusionism.